It's quite the honor to join everybody today. This is an august group of scholars, and I also have a very special honor of following up from my doctor father, Dr. Siebert. So if I say anything wrong, it's because of me. If I say anything right, it's because of him. So today when I'm reading Erich Fromm, we're reading him in a context that is slightly different from when most of his work was predominantly written. Although obviously it's not completely different. We are now living in what at least Habermas calls the post-secular society. And that's a society where, especially in the West, where we're increasingly becoming secular, while at the same time religion is not disappearing as was expected in traditional secularization theory. It remains. And in fact, the antagonism gets even deeper the more secular society becomes, the more recalcitrant religion becomes, or what's left of it. Now, there's a variety within the West of how that's happening. Certainly, you can see that antagonism very clear here in the United States, maybe a little bit less so in parts of Europe. But throughout most of the West, we're going through what sociologists have called the great de-churching, that those who just a generation, 2 generations ago would be committed churchgoers, like my grandparents who were Dutch Reformed, so they were in the pews every day, and the kids were at Sunday school and every Wednesday. That's becoming less and less the case. While that's happening, we're also dealing with this sociological changes in meaning or lack of meaning within society that's causing things like the deaths of despair, which is affecting my age group more than anyone else, apparently, in at least in America, where white males of middle age, 40s, 50s, are committing suicide at such higher rates than they've ever seen. So something's going on here in society, and that Fromm already pointed to those changes, and much of his work that he was written in 1950s and 1960s. In fact, he predicted that this would be the case, that this kind of extreme alienation would be the case. He called our age today the dehumanized society of AD 2000, already predicting far ahead of himself. The idolatrous Moloch society, the society that demands sacrifice of its people. And that society would be determined by techne and profit and alienation and exploitation. Now, this is clearly an age of rapid change, uncertainty in economics, politics, cultural change is happening very quickly. I think in America, we might be more used to it than in Europe. Europe is becoming more Americanized, more diverse at a much faster rate. We were born into diversity here in the United States, but also technological change. The fact that we're all over the world right now, and yet we can talk to each other is an amazing feat, but it's also a feat that is deeply problematic for a lot of people. So Heraclitus talked about pantare, everything flows, everything is moving, but everything is flowing fast. Everything is moving really, really fast. And this kind of rapid change is difficult for a lot of people to deal with. Obviously, it's driven by demographics, demographic change, cultural change, technological change. Of course, now, what does this give birth to? In the West, it gives birth to the rise of authoritarian populism as a means of halting, arresting, or even slaying, maybe even turning back this perceived chaos. So you're starting to hear words like, I'll use a lot of the German words, the Überfremdung, that somehow the West is being over-foreignized, that there's too many people who aren't Westerners within the Western ethnosphere, that there's a certain level of Umvolkung going on, the deculturalization, if you will, that the traditional Western culture or Western cultural markers are somehow disintegrating before our eyes. And this is causing a state of to use a Heideggerian term, Uneigentlichkeit, this inauthenticity of the West, that it's no longer attached to its roots, its own sources, its own cultural sources. And of course, this is being driven by, according to the right, the Le Grand Remplacement, right? The Great Replacement. that somehow this is not just a movement of history, a natural movement of history, but this is an orchestrated change in the West for very specific political and economic reasons. Now, that's what you're hearing on the right. On the left, I think it's very clear that the left, in many cases, those who would be reading Fromm, in many cases, still today, are suffering from what's called oikophobia or Western self-contempt. A lot of the critical theory I do is connected with other parts of the world. I try to expand critical theory into the Muslim world and sort of marry Islamic language with philosophical language from the West, especially with the critical theorists. And one of the things that I'm oftentimes coming into contact with is not only people from the other parts of the world who are deeply critical of the West, as they should be, but Westerners have gotten so much to the case, so much to the point where they can't see anything good in the West anymore, anything salvageable, anything worth preserving, lest they be called a conservative or something. So Western self-contempt or oikophobia, in many cases, has gripped much of the West. And this has caused what can be called ethnomasochism, the constant, Western self-persecution, that the promise of the West, which, let's be honest, is the West has been very hypocritical through much of its history, but nevertheless, the promise of the West still remains, yet we can hardly see it. And this self-persecution is this democracy of hypocrisy. Yes, critique, but where's the preservation? Now, into this antagonism, religion has been recruited as an identity marker that separates the legacy citizens, which the right is now using this term, the legacy citizens. This is the citizens of the Bluten Boden. And this religion is being used against what can be called the anatopists. So anatopists are people who are in the wrong place. They're not necessarily people who are worthy of a second Auschwitz or something, but they're people in the wrong place. If they were in their own homes, in their own cultures, their own societies, we would love to go visit them. But when they come from Syria or Egypt or India into our society, that's a problem, right? So this is the religion is being, as I said, recruited as an identity marker to say, these are the people that belong, and these are the people that do not belong. Now, Fromm is very aware, and he writes hundreds of pages on the dialectical nature of religion, its capacity for emancipation, as well as oppression, its revolutionary characteristics and its counter-revolutionary characteristics, its democratic elements, its dictatorial and authoritarian elements, as Dr. Siebert talked about. And that very much echoes Marx's position when he gives his definition of religion, that religious suffering is at the same time an expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature and the sentiment of a heartless world and the soulless condition, right? I mean, it's a protest, it's real, it's genuine in that sense, but what does it do? For Marx, obviously, it opiates the masses, and they no longer fight against the conditions that create such alienation. The Frankfurt School didn't necessarily follow in that line of thinking. For instance, in Horkheimer, he said, in religion, in its symbols, religion places an apparatus at the disposal of tortured men through which they express their suffering and their hope, the commitment to negate what is the case. This is one of the most important functions of religion. He says, a respectable psychology of religion would have to distinguish between its positive and negative aspects. It would have to separate proper human feelings and ideas from an ideological form which falsifies them, but which is also partly their product. Now, there's no doubt about it. I think we all agree. Erich Fromm's work is a respectable psychology of religion that thoroughly understands the dialectical nature of religion. Religion could still be a productive, loving, emancipatory interpretation of the world and orientation of action. It's not all the Inquisition. It's not all the Crusades. It's not all only witch burning, things like this. And therefore, Fromm elevates a humanistic religious ecumenicism in his work that identified the universal humanistic elements in both religion and philosophy. For instance, in the book, The Revolution of Hope, Fromm writes, all norms of the great humanist religions like Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam or which is his words, or Islam, or the great humanistic philosophers from the pre-Socratic to contemporary thinkers are the specific elaborations of this general principle of values, reverence of life, overcoming of one's greed, love for one's neighbor, knowledge of the truth, different from uncritical knowledge of facts, are the goals common to all humanistic, philosophical, and religious systems of the West and the East, to quote Fromm, unquote. Now, this type of seeing the humanistic core, this religious ecumenicism within Fromm's work is in many ways in contradistinction to the modern culture Kampf, the struggle of cultures that is currently happening within the Willensgemeinschaften countries, right? The willed communities, where religion has once again become a cultural identity marker. We all know that there is a certain Daseinkampf, a certain struggle of spirits taking place within the West right now. And it's not a struggle of spirits between various religions. It's not Islam versus Christianity or whatnot, but it is between those who are committed themselves to a pluralistic, tolerant, inclusive type of society, and those who are yearning for a retrotopia, a way of slaying the chaos, a way of slaying the change, a way of slaying the Volkerchaos, as they call it, the chaos of people. Fromm's humanistic ecumenicism lends itself well to the democratic multicultural societies, as it seeks to find the humanistic core of our religions, our philosophies, our ways of being in the world. It emphasizes our shared human concerns, our shared human frailties, our similar desires, our similar needs. It emphasizes that which makes us human, thus that which makes us a single humanity. Without glossing over the differences, nevertheless, it attempts to find the core. So in this sense, Fromm's religious ecumenicism is in contradistinction to this religion as identity or identity religion. Identity religion is an augmentation of the religious exterior, religion, signs, symbols, history, the apotheosis of these things for political and cultural reasons. Identity religion belongs to, in the sense, the legacy citizens. It is a cultural good that distinguishes those who belong and those who do not belong. And despite the West's secularity, Christendom, once again, especially here in the US, is invoked as a means of creating an anti-identity, the non-identical, emphasizing that these other people are people who do not belong. They're non-identical, specifically immigrants, refugees, political citizens, people who have, if you will, Staatsbürgerschaft, right? They are citizens on paper, but they're not citizens of the Volk. That they are legal citizens, but they don't have the pre-political foundations of shared history, shared language going back generations, shared culture, things like this. This is different than Christian nationalism, which saturates Christianity with the apotheosis of the nation. It is the opposite of remember this old Nazi term Gottgläubig, right? This believing in God movement during the Nazi times, which said that we don't have to belong to these particular religious or not organizations, but we don't have to belong to this denomination. We can emancipate ourselves from institutional religion as long as we continue to believe in God. This is the opposite of that. This is, I don't have to believe in God. Nevertheless, I claim the religious institution. I claim the symbols of religion, right? Because what it has a political export that I need. So this claiming of the church, if you will, or of religion, institutional religion, but leaving behind God, the morality and the morality associated with Christianity, especially Jesus's radical message of agape, is what you're seeing in a variety of different movements throughout the West, right-wing, authoritarian, populist movements. So my claim is this, and this is my last point: the left's abandonment of religion has a political export. And by abandoning religion, the left has given the far right what Fromm in his book Beyond the Chains of Illusion calls the catalog, our catalog of humanity's answers to questions of human existence. When the left abandons that, puts it in the hands of what can be called the bad custodians, the far right. What do they do with it? They use it as a weapon in the current Daseinkampf. So that, essentially 3,000 years worth of material of religious theologies, of religious history, once it's abandoned as simply as saying it's all hogwash, that it's all passe, that it belongs to the infancy of humanity. That is a rich resource we just handed over to those who will use it as a weapon against everyone they believe doesn't belong in the West. So for me, I think what we have to do as people who are generally center left, progressives or whatnot, we have to take religion seriously. If not as a comprehensive worldview, at least as a source for moral, practical wisdom. And whether you're secular, atheistic, we have to follow Fromm's example and enter into a robust dialogue, discourse, and debate with people who are religious to try to find that common humanity that Fromm guarantees us is part of religion. And with that, I'll be done.